You mentioned just a minute ago when you talked about digestion, the idea of a stronger civilization absorbing in some shape or form the quote-unquote, you didn't use the word weaker, but I take it as implied. So that kind of brings us to the idea of Darwinism, the idea that civilizations can also be subject to the same notion, same paradigm of Darwinism. So for instance, at a very trivial level, if you say Apple didn't invent anything, those constituent technologies were already there, Apple just came along at the right time. Tablet computers have been around, but it took a particular time, set of circumstances, and a place for these constituent technologies to be brought together in order to be what it is today, what the tablet is today, right? So that's a very trivial example of a broader concept of...
Can you get to the question now?
So where I'm going with this is it our ego that wants us to go back to a past glory, or...
I'll answer that.
Yeah, let me stop there.
Sure, I'll answer that. So I already answered it by saying that the benefits of being non-digestible are as follows. First, the original tradition may have more to offer than has been taken. So the guy who came up with Yoga Nidra can do many, many more things than just what one Westerner from Stanford went and learned and patented. So he may have taken a superficial understanding, and the problem is not the borrowing. The problem is that the erasing the source makes the source obscure. It loses its continuity of further development. So the borrowing is in an incomplete borrowing. It's not complete enough because it's done in haste. So the original source sort of loses out, whereas it has a lot more to offer. It's sort of like saying we'll actually take the goodies out of this research lab, but we'll shut down the lab. So I'm saying you take the goodies, but don't shut down the lab. Let the lab also continue developing new enhancements. So if the West were to take ideas out of India and credit them properly, and the Indians were to nurture these systems, these ancient systems, then they would keep bringing about more enhancements. So it's not for ego. It's sort of like, why don't you want to shut down someone's lab? Is it for the ego? Well, it's because the lab is useful. The lab has more things to discover. So I would say that is the primary reason, is that you should borrow cross cultures without destroying and without erasing the other side. That's the idea for doing this. And you know, when the West borrows from Greece, a lot of Western thought came out of Greece. We know that. The Greek sources are not erased. It's fashionable to quote Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, but it is not fashionable to quote Abhinav Gupta or Bhartrhari or Patanjali or Panini, from where a lot of ideas came. So why is it that when the West absorbs something out of Greece, it is kept alive? Students in universities study Greek thought, but when the West absorbs ideas out of Indian civilization, those original sources are not taught. They are considered to be obsolete or finished off. It's that, what I like is a level playing field. That's all.
A more sophisticated patent office.
I have two questions. One, the discussion you are advancing here seems purely academic to me, on the basis of Hegelian concept of dialectics in ideas. Ideas flow, and you are advancing one of the ideas in just juxtaposition the other ideas, number one. Number two, it seems to me that the globalization of the Western culture that is apparent today, how do you subscribe that it may be challenged, and what will be the system which will be able to challenge?
Well, first of all, the West has many Westerners challenging itself. West is very self-critical. Some of the people I mentioned who are cutting-edge neuroscientists, some of the people who are looking at environmentalist models, some of the people who are looking at social models for aging, are in fact looking at other civilizations. So it is not that necessarily that Indians are challenging the old West and replacing it with some Indian ideas. Westerners are challenging their own orthodox, their own traditional West and bringing in Indian ideas. So the West is already doing that job. So the question is whether Indians are even aware of this. So to some extent it is to make Indians aware that your civilization you don't have to give up, because in fact even the West is adopting some of those methods. There's something called the pizza effect. A pizza effect is that a culture does not respect itself until Americans turn it into Pizza Hut and make it world famous, and then the guys in the villages in Italy think pizza is a great thing because now it's become famous. So this is called pizza effect because the prestige of your pizza comes back via Pizza Hut. But previously you didn't think it's that great. So there is a pizza effect going on with Westerners adopting Indian culture and Indian ideas and making it very prominent, and then Indians saying, wow, you know, this must be cool because we're not after all that bad because Westerners are liking it, so maybe we're okay. So in a sense I'm also utilizing the pizza effect, in a sense. In 2000, IIT Kharagpur, celebrated their 50th anniversary. So my foundation received a grant request to fund conferences. And among the list of conferences, the one that attracted my attention most was called Mind Science. So I said, I'm interested in funding Mind Science, but I'd like to know what's the content of this conference going to be. And they showed me a plan of who will speak and what they'll speak on. And it was all Western models of mind, Western theories of mind. I didn't see any Panini, Patanjali, I didn't see any Buddhist thought, I didn't see any of the great meditation systems, I didn't see any of that. So I wrote to them that I will fund it, but you should have one panel on Indian models of mind. I got this very nasty email which I kept with me, which said we are not chauvinists, we don't have ego, we are scientific people, we are secular, this kind of stuff. So I got hold of 5 white Western friends and said, you go and talk about Indian civilization. Yeah? One's a Buddhist and he's been a follower of Dalai Lama and he's great at Columbia University. One is a scholar of Patanjali in Cambridge. One is practice Kundalini and Tantra in California. One is in New York in a hospital and he's a Sri Aurobindo follower and they're following all these neurological techniques and he's a Sri Aurobindo follower, like that. So I said, now's your chance to nurture the roots. You've been harvesting the fruits, now your chance to nurture the roots. So I want you to write a proposal and explain, do not give up the original Sanskrit terms, use the original terms, mention who initiated you, who was your guru, where did you practice, how did you learn it, acknowledge all the history of how you got this idea, and then explain how you are teaching it in the West, what are the benefits, why are the Westerners learning this, what are they doing with it. So I got these 5 guys' proposals and I sent it to IIT Kharagpur. Like that they accepted it, because now Westerners are saying it. Okay, so all your question about is it ego and all that and is it viable, I'm answering you that this is how I did it. This is the pizza effect. And when these guys went to IIT Kharagpur, they got standing ovations. And they got so many invites from Kerala and from Pondicherry and from Chennai and Delhi University to talk about these Indian models. And I kept funding it for 7-8 years. I funded a team of people. First it was Westerners, and then we got young Indian scholars to join them. And this started a mobilization on Indian psychology. A new discipline was born. I just gave a talk in January in Delhi University. They brought a large number of people to do a seminar on Indian psychology. I'm told there's about 150 to 200 practicing professional researchers and academicians and scholars of psychology in India who call themselves, Indian psychologists, in the sense that it's not a Western model of mind, but an Indian model of mind. So I have created, or I'm one of many who have worked together to create a new discipline called Indian Approaches to Mind and Psychology. And it's using Westerners to bring this back to India and to tell them that this is where we got it from.
Just ask a question, follow up on that. You keep referring to Indians in our philosophy, etc. But in the 40 years since I've lived here in the US, I've been back to India many times and find deep cultural differences between different regions of India. Are you really referring to Hindu philosophy as opposed to Indian philosophy?
Well, I'm referring to classical India, which includes Buddhism. It includes Charvakas. Charvakas were didn't believe in a god or something, but they were scientific kind of mind. I'm looking at the people who built the Harappan civilization, who were metallurgists. In fact, the people who were metallurgists and textile type of people, the relationship to what was their spiritual tradition is not very clear. It's not even clear who they were, but they were Indians. So it's not clear if the people who discovered the mathematics were what was their philosophical bent of mind, but they were scientists. We tend to think that Sanskrit is a language of Hindus, but I would like to tell you this: the vast majority, if you were to look at a bibliography of all known Sanskrit texts, the vast majority of Sanskrit texts are science, poetry, stories, political thought, statecraft, governance. They are not religious texts. There is this view that to study Sanskrit you got to be a Hindu, but there is a huge amount of non-religious, non-spiritual Sanskrit knowledge. So knowledge is a bigger space than the dimension which is nowadays called Hinduism. So at that time there wasn't that word even. There was a word dharma, and then there was even bigger than dharma is knowledge. Sanatan dharma was a term, but I'm saying that there's even bigger than Sanatan dharma is knowledge, because this knowledge is also about metallurgy, it's all about medicine, it's also about looking after plants and how to have statecraft and things of that sort. So the idea, the people who did water harvesting, it is a very I started my talk by emphasizing the material, practical, worldly approach to knowledge, because I didn't want to found it on and base my whole talk and discussion on a spiritual tradition, which would take me in that direction. But to not go in that direction, I in fact emphasize, and our 20-volume series, we're not talking religion at all. 20-volume series, when we talk the history of steel building or making cities or whatever, we do not even know what their traditional spiritual knowledge was of those workers, because it's not very clear.
Basically, it's very interesting, your thought process, and I might call it wisdom, Indian wisdom of the ages. Have you thought about this connection that you have in mind and what Gandhi talked about? Self-purification, self-development, and how to develop a community, and then end up with the Swaraj.
Absolutely.
This is a beautiful way. He was the most modern person.
Yes.
He thought about how to use Indian wisdom.
Yes. I really like that you brought this up.
Can you make that connection?
Yes.
A lot of people misses that connection.
In fact, in this book, it begins with Gandhi, ends with Gandhi. In this book, okay. This idea of being different, I say the quintessential personality who lived being different is Gandhi. Because Gandhi never compromised his style, his dress, how he would eat. He took his goat to Buckingham Palace because when he went to England, because this is his lifestyle, this is what he will eat and what he will drink, and he's not trying to impress them and be like them. He was not interested in being accepted by the British on the British terms, but on his own terms. He did not translate the Indian terms. He had Swadharma, and he had Satyagraha, and he has Swaraj, and they kept asking what is all this, and he would keep saying that this is not translatable. So I have my chapter 5 is called non-translatables, which means the things which a civilization has, and therefore because the civilization has a certain experience, it has a word for it, and another civilization might not have a word for it. They might not have a word for yoga because they didn't have yoga. So if you translate yoga as exercise or gymnastics or prayer, it is not the right thing. So when asked what is the satyagraha, when the British judge asked him what is the satyagraha, he keeps using the word satyagraha and explaining what he is doing, but he doesn't replace it with some simple word. And when the judge says, okay, then why are you doing it? He says it will give us Swaraj. So he gives another word like that. You see, this is Gandhi is the quintessential, non-translatable, non-digestible, really kind of a solid guy from our soil. That's a very good, I didn't think of reminding, but I have a lot written on Gandhi in this book.
I have a second question. Can you not translate that which I would call is a very strong degeneration of our society in India today.
Yes, I think
Think about what is happening in the so-called Delhi and all those various layers.
yes,
The real people which Gandhi has in mind are not being served.
yeah, I think there's many issues going on. There is also a huge kind of degenerate materialism. People tell me that now we'll be solving these problems with all the money, but I think that money is also kind of corrupting the character of people. So there is a new kind of elitism, not that old-fashioned elitism, but a new kind of elitism. Who's got the BMW, who's got a US trip stamped on his passport and got a Swiss account and all those kind of things. There's corruption, there is selfishness. So this is not this kind of a renaissance of India is not a kind of a traditional Indian kind of idea of renaissance. This is not Indian values. This is all part of the mimicry of a very hedonistic lifestyle. Now, I keep telling people in my lectures in India, why don't you copy the good things from the Americans? Because Americans got a lot of good things. You should be, copying the work ethic. You should be copying all kinds of good stuff that the Americans have, but you are copying all the bad things. The smoking, for example. The smoking industry is declining in this country. Philip Morris, all these guys, because people are losing smoking. So guess where is the export market? Asia. Asia is the fastest growing cigarette market, liquor market. It's a huge growing. These Scotch guys are really delighted. Now there's a Scotch whiskey going up like crazy. So I think you're absolutely right. The renaissance of India is a kind of materialistic, hedonistic approach, and not necessarily sustainable. So I'm not arguing from a nostalgia point of view. I'm arguing, is it practical to achieve it? Or will you create more tension because there'll be haves and have-nots? There's such a huge concentration of power which is getting worse. And there's farmer suicides, while there's, we measure how many billionaires we got, and all these magazines and newspapers are really excited we got all these billionaires. But I'm more concerned that there's so many lakhs of farmer suicides. And that is the area that I'm more interested in.
The question in the back. I listened to some very nice conversation about why the governance of China is very stable, although it's not a democracy. And the speaker introduced the term of civilization nation. And I am wondering that the evidence you bring from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, that there is no central large ruler and each of the small cities was self-sufficient, which is also a Gandhian philosophy, is that at contradiction with the current democratic rule procedure, and if the two can reconcile?
Well, this is a beautiful question. In fact, one of the things I'm researching with the help of what this book is doing is opening doors and planting seeds in many disciplines. So I'm also working with social scientists and people in these areas, political scientists, to see if this very central power approach that we got from the British had this central power approach to control Indians. So they needed, the district collector was a tax extortionist guy. We still use the word district collector. I mean, that's a colonial, he should be serving the people rather than a collector. No? So this mindset of a whole hierarchy with a very centralized Delhi as sort of the head of an empire, this needs to be questioned. Whether this is this is the right ethos of the average person. The average person in India, if he has to get justice, he has to represent his case in a very westernized style of law. He has to get himself attorney, lawyer. If a person in a village, I did a lot of work in Nagapattinam after the tsunami. We built a youth hospital, and so I spent months there living with the fishermen and spending actually living and eating and being with them. I found that when they needed something from the government, they had to go through an NGO, which was a bunch of well-educated, in the Western sense, modern Indians, westernized Indians. They had to interface through these NGOs to get service from their own government. So they're alienated in their own country. And this self-alienation is causing a lot of problems, I would think. So we need to figure out, is there is this central parliament, very central system of government viable for India? Or does there have to be a dilution of the federal system, and not only down to states, but even further down to
It's kind of
districts?
interesting because the concept of India as we know it today was actually introduced by the British.
Yes.
Because up until the British came in, India was ruled by several hundred princedoms or, smaller kingdoms. So when you talk about India, which India are you referring to? The pre-colonial India, or going back 1,000 years, the Harappan India, or the modern India?
See, there's different answers depending on whether you're talking about culture and civilization and knowledge systems, in which case there has been continuity. A lot of these knowledge systems are still alive and well, like classical Indian dance, and all the messages it gives you is still alive. And the storytelling is still alive. That is one India. Or are you talking about governance? Now, if you're talking about governance, there has been India is a recent construction based on British style of governance replaced with a parliament democracy copied mainly from Britain and a few other places, a hodgepodge of constitutions put together. So India as a political entity is a recent construction, but India as a civilizational entity is not a recent construction. It's a very old construction. And the two are at odds. The conflict between Bharat and India, if you want to call it like that, there is a conflict. The conflict is that the civilization has a certain set of ethos, certain social ideas, certain ways of governance, very decentralized, how you treat people. There's a whole value system. And now this imported knowledge system for politics and governance and statecraft is actually at odds with it. So there is an India versus India clash going on today. And I think this is something people don't want to talk about.
Question. You referred to knowledge transfer, and I believe that knowledge transfer has been happening on a global scale for thousands of years. I mean, back in the days of Marco Polo and all the other people who transferred knowledge. So the good things got transferred, meaning that materialistic things got transferred. And even today I'm seeing that, take China as an example, that when they take a contract from the West to manufacture something, and they are very well known for their manufacturing capabilities, that not only do they ask for the manufacturing to be done in China, but also the IP, the intellectual capital that goes into making something. So they are capturing all of that. But what my view is that it's only happening at an accelerated pace today relative to what it was happening 4,000 years ago. So my question to you is, would you project that in the future, and I don't know whether future is 50 years, 100 years or whatever, that there, just like water finds its own level, that intellectual property also will find its own level, and that we'll all be happily manufacturing and training and doing things in our own way. Therefore, there will be no need for people to have BMWs and Mercedes only, but can make do with walking and bicycles and nano cities.
Yeah, I think that I hope that's the outcome in the future, that there is not one monolithic knowledge system and one monolithic technology which says BMW is the right lifestyle, but many, many lifestyles. My concern is actually not over knowledge transfer. I think knowledge transfer has been happening for 4,000 or 5,000 years or longer. Very slow, the equivalent of an internet with people traveling and land route, ocean route, all that stuff, knowledge going back and forth. And that's wonderful and beautiful. But you see, until recently, the people did not have the means to project power far away and control and oppress and obliterate somebody's native way of life. That wasn't the case. So while knowledge was transferring, when India transferred a huge amount of knowledge with traveling Buddhists to China and Japan, and it was not just religion, it was agriculture, linguistics, a lot of the alphabet in the Japanese, they'll tell you, come from the Sanskrit, and a lot of these martial arts came from India. So it's not about religion, but a lot of other cultural things and scientific knowledge and so on also transferred back and forth. Rice came from China, a lot of agricultural things came from India there. The difference is that in those days, there was no attempt by an Indian ruler to impose a governor there, collect taxes from those guys, change their name, change their sense of history, to make them part of our idea of history and deny them their own continuity with their ancestry. There was no tampering with their sense of identity. There was no tampering with their sense of self-esteem and their sense of autonomy and integrity. So you had peer-to-peer knowledge transfer, peer-to-peer, equals. It was not a kind of a head with a subordinate. It was not master-slave knowledge transfer. I think that this is a more recent thing in an international arena, because the power of the West in the colonial era became so dominant that for the first time here was a civilization able to and willing to and determined to spread its knowledge and obliterate other knowledge systems because they were considered a competitor or considered a threat. So where we are going to go in the future is there will be a multipolar knowledge system. I think China is assimilating all this IP that it's getting, but China is also leading in patents, in research, and we should not underestimate and think of Chinese as just a bunch of copycats, because I think very smart people. And it is characteristic of Americans to underestimate. People underestimate the Japanese auto industry. I used to live in Detroit, and my friends worked in all the car companies. They said, "Nay, you don't realize, Japanese, they're no good. They because they're cheap labor, they're doing it." And then 2-3 years later, they would say that certain things their manufacturing is better, but because they're small hands, they're not well fed, it's tough guys like us. So they can get and do fine things because they're small hands. It was all this chauvinistic stuff. And the same guys, were out of work, these guys in Detroit, because Japanese took them to lunch, So do not underestimate what the Chinese will do in terms of innovating new technology. And I think it will be a more multipolar world of knowledge systems, and there will be many traditional knowledges of various places, including India, which will revive. I mean, I'm glad to tell you that there are people working in areas like health and medicine who are coming up with some very interesting breakthroughs using Indian knowledge systems. Not only people in India, but Westerners also are very interested in looking at Indian medical break ideas and coming up with new ideas. So there will be a multipolar competing knowledge systems, and what I'm trying to encourage is that we are to play the game. We are to also be part of that.
Yeah, I was wondering, in your studies, have you found whether any of the original Indian ideas were based on elements drawn from other civilizations prior, that are not Western, that are not Chinese, that are none of the ones that you mentioned, but there are other things that Indians drew from and built on that we don't know about? Yeah,
I think that's, you keep going further and further back in history, and you find that there's a lot of resemblance of symbols mentioned in Indian texts and found in Indian art that you'll also find in Europe, and you'll find in Africa, and you'll find in the Middle East. And people argue and quibble, where did it come from and how did it travel? We don't quite know. And being a scientist by training, I'm skeptical to accept any view until it's confirmed. So I believe that let there be many theories. I don't believe that we should stop one theory because it could be politically motivated. I think people should all be able to talk, and then we need evidence. So where is the origin of ideas in prehistory, what the Westerners call prehistory because their recorded history starts at a certain time, is a very fascinating question. And I reject these theories of history that have come up since Hegel's time, which privilege the West and make it the template of world history. Everybody has to follow their trajectory. I reject that. And so I think the whole study of history is now opened up and up for grabs, and there will be probably many new breakthroughs. People found Dwarka off the coast of Gujarat, and now they're looking for submarines to go down, but they know that there are artifacts that exist there. And when the tsunami happened, the 1 or 2 kilometers, the ocean went back before it came again. And so people have pictures of 2 kilometers of beach, and many archaeological sites were exposed, and some of them are still there. I went and took pictures of that. Some very old prehistoric sites, Mahabalipuram, which had been under the ocean, but there were myths and stories. There were stories that when the Chinese ships used to come, they used to see 7 temples with the fire lit on the top, like lighthouses, 7 of them. And so what we now have as the Mahabalipuram temple is 1. So the local tour guide says that the other 6 are because the ocean level has gone up or whatever, they sank into the ocean, and nobody really believed whether it's true or not. But when the tsunami happened, a couple of those others also got exposed. So some of this prehistoric stuff, gradually starts coming out. And so every time this comes out, people have to revise their idea of history quite seriously. So this is kind of a fascinating area
for preservation of cultures and making it indigestible. The Gandhis are gone. What you are saying, my father told me a long time ago. And when we go, we pass on. Who is to preserve this, and will we be totally taken over? Because we are basically hating the West. All our kids are. Do wealth, they're making all the IT wealth. What are they spending on? Booze, all bad habits. So the core family values, preserving a culture, how do we practically think we are going to convey to our youngsters to...
Sure, that's a good question. Let me answer that question. So first of all, I don't think that, I'm sorry if I miscommunicated, but I didn't intend to say that there's a partition between spirituality and material. What I meant to say is, we cannot dismiss Indian tradition as spiritual only, mystical only. It also has a very strong material dimension. Both dimensions are there, and not everybody is one or the other. Not everybody is a sannyasi or expected to be one. There's also Vaishyas who are commercial traders and manufacturers and so on. So in our tradition, there is a purusharth for wealth creation, for materialism. There's a purusharth for that. So it is a legitimate, to pursue desires and pursue within ethical norms, not in an unethical way, and to pursue material advancement and wealth accumulation is also considered a valid pursuit in our tradition. So this doesn't mean that there's a bifurcation and opposition between the two, because they're both accepted. Now, as far as the issue you raised, which is very concerning to me also, that a guy like me writes this book and intellectuals read it. What's behind your question, if I'm understanding correctly, is how do we make a real world impact? Because what you're saying is, in the real world things are getting worse. Okay, and some intellectual sitting somewhere and writing books and talking, how will it make an impact? So what one guy can do is all I can do. I am basically working with people who are social scientists, people who are involved in NGOs, people who are involved in education. I addressed the International Conference on Education in Delhi, where several hundred educators came, and I gave them a seminar on some of these issues. And what is interesting to me is that India is accelerating in both sides, both ways, opposite ways. There is a huge renaissance of the tradition. There is a renaissance of tradition. And there is a renaissance that there are educators very concerned about bringing back traditional ideas through education. There's a lot of interest on the part of some wealthy industrialists to fund these kind of projects. I get called and say people want to know, okay, how do we fund this? How do we train 100 people to go around talking like you? People asking me, can you run an academy and train youth to be going around spreading these ideas among young people? And I get more invites to come and talk to young people in colleges than I'm able to accept, because I don't have the energy to go and do so much. So certainly this tells me that the interest is there. And 5-10 years ago, the IITs were not as interested in these kind of things, but today every IIT wants a whole workshop and a whole seminar. So somewhere the doors are opening. But at the other side, we're also becoming more hedonistic. The society is going their way. I don't know which is a faster trend. And depends on, if you're in Delhi, where my relatives are, and I go and spend a lot of time there, the situation is pretty bad from this point of view. Because everybody is into the latest single malt. They want to know whether you got this particular kind, which is so many years old. And this is the kind of thing, they're all into that, they're all into that. And then when I leave Delhi, I find that in other towns, other state capitals and smaller towns, I find there's a huge desire to sort of respect our tradition. And there's a big dichotomy between the English press and the local language press. If you take, one of the things I'm doing is translating these books into other languages. Because I find that the people who read those languages are still sort of connected to the roots. So there is two Indias in that.
Theory is that there used to be Ganarajyas in India. Ganarajya, which is the ultimate form of ultimate form of democracy.
Yeah.
Ganarajya.
People's.
I'm not sure if Kapil Vastu and Lechwe and all those people were like that, but there is some evidence. And then you mentioned about Mohenjo-daro and all that, where it is not centrally controlled like kings, but it is more like a Ganarajya type of situation. That will lead us to believe that the democracy actually was in existence in India even long before the Greek form of democracy.
Yes.
So that's one thing, and the other thing is there is a lot of, you mentioned scientific evidence, there is a lot of evidence about Saraswati being discovered, like radioisotope dating in Jaisalmer area and of course the ISRO things and stuff like that.
Yes.
And the theory of, I guess it used to be called Aryan invasion theory, and then Aryan migration theory.
They're no good.
Discontinued.
Yeah.
And then there's new theory of out of India theory.
That's correct.
So you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, if you take the book which was before being different, the book which is in yellow called Breaking India, there's a whole lot on the evidence on the history of how the Aryan-Dravidian divide was fabricated, who fabricated it, why they fabricated it, and all kinds of original text and evidence I'm showing you, and what is false about it based on all kinds of new evidence, including DNA evidence. So if you're interested, there's a lot of section on that written about it. As far as democracy is concerned, there are such claims. There are claims that are accepted that there are certain kingdoms which had something sort of like a democracy. There are some inscriptions where a certain group of people come and they vote, and you need this many votes to decide who's going to be the next guy and all that. So it certainly seems to have existed, and I don't know on what scale it existed and for what period of time it might have lasted.
There is an example of Vaishali. Vaishali was a republic, and Buddha, Buddha came to Vaishali.
Yes.
After enlightenment.
Yes.
So that means it gave 500 BC.
At least, and it may have lasted even before that. So what we don't know is how pervasive it was beyond a few places, and why it went away. What was the cause it went away? And what would it take to revive some of these things? Because what we do know that this panchayat system and this decentralized village self-sufficiency has been around, and maybe one of the solutions to, like in the United States, they're saying buy local. That's a Gandhian idea. Buy local fruit and produce, because it is not manufactured and kept in cold storage 1,000 miles away and harvested a month ago or a year ago, but it is buy local. Many people participate in these local co-ops. I don't know if you have them here or not, organic farming co-ops. Now, I think there's a return to some of these things coming. The milkman went away. The milkman is a guy in this country who used to come, 2 generations back and give you the milk from local cows. And it was not that the cows are somewhere 1,000 miles away and, it's all manufacturing in like a factory environment. And so some of these ideas for health trees, people are finding the health factor is bringing a return to some of these traditional things.
The book is one of the media. I'm going to talk about the media actually. The book is one of the media that's for intellectual only. And general or mass public is oriented or moved by film industry these days. All Hollywood is all movies or anything, even sitcoms or Passage to India or Doom to Temple or Doom to India or whatever, even last week's this Oscar, they are all derogatory to India. So
question
what I'm talking,
question
question is, I will talk anything about the media.
Yeah. So
Latest actually
No, let me give you my views on this whole issue. I think that there is multiple points of intervention, not one point of intervention.
Media, I'm talking media.
No, but I'm saying that to change society, there's multiple points of intervention. There is the education system, which is very important. You can't say it's only media. K through 12, school textbooks, teacher training is a very big force. I mean, it has a huge influence. media has a huge influence. Policy making has an influence, because if the policy makers are allocating resources for a certain kind of vision, they are neglecting resources for a different kind of vision, you can't say it has no effect. You can't say that let's ignore the mindset of the policy makers and the mindset of the educators and just make some Bollywood movies and we'll solve the problem. It's not like that. So there are multiple points of intervention and multiple force multipliers, leverages, many kinds. And media is one of them. So I'm clearly aware of that. I would love to have people on the television, because television is also full of a lot of nonsense, not just Bollywood movies, but also television, which is...
Even some Indian movies are derogatory to India.
Of course, not only some, but a large number of them.
Right.
I mean, it's fashionable. It is quite fashionable to do that. So the problem is definitely there, and I fully agree with you. There's a problem.
Have you seen any parallel in your study of history, whether it's Indian or otherwise, where media or information has been controlled by a few sources, and has it ever happened?
See, the thing is that the technology was only recent for this kind of control. But what happened in traditional India is there were two levels. There is a Shastrik Parampara, which is sort of, Brahmins and knowledge of learned people being transmitted to other learned people. And there is Lok Parampara, which is the whole Puranas, Itihas, the dance, the music, the pop culture. The pop culture was very egalitarian and very adaptive and flexible and very pervasive, and did not get controlled by authorities, because a person in a village could do their own Ram Leela, their own interpretation of what they felt was, this was pervasive. So the recent technology has created the opportunity to standardize, and when you can standardize, then you can also control that standard. So this is a very recent thing. Turning Ram Leela from a local production. When I was a kid, our neighborhood did Ram Leela. We spent 2-3 months, everybody was in it. And so it was kind of like ours, and then some other place 5 kilometers away did a different version of Ram Leela, and they had their own idea. And this is how it was in Delhi. I'm talking about a place like Delhi. I don't see any Ram Leela going on in Delhi, because you can get a DVD and watch it. What that does is, you standardized rather than adaptability, rather than localization and customization and tailoring it, and keeping it moving with the times and shifting it a little bit to modulate the story for what was required or what was interesting. It's become like a standardized canon. The canonization of Indian texts is a recent thing, and you find this is a very big difference with Western traditions, because Western traditions, thinking that God came and gave a unique message at a unique point in time to somebody, therefore we must record and keep it absolutely standard, never let a word be changed. That idea of fossilizing, fixing dogma is in the Western traditions, but not so solid in the Indian traditions. Because while the Shruti, like Vedas, are recited impeccably and exactly the same way for thousands of years, but as far as the Itihas is concerned, as far as the Puranas are concerned, they're always adaptable. As far as the Nat Shastra as a method of enhancing yourself is concerned, it's highly adaptable. As far as the way you play your ragas, it's improvised. So there is a huge improvisational dimension of Indian culture, which prevented it from being controlled by some authority. That layer is very strong. It's still strong, actually.
I have an interesting question for you.
Good. I need an interesting question. Finally, we want to get an interesting question.
Have you thought about rewriting your books in verse? Because if there were anything that were a core Indian value that's been lost, it's the oral tradition that distinguished us most from the West. We suffer from it because we don't have so many printed records. Half our palm leaves are gone. But what sustained the transmission of knowledge through the millennia was the notion of poetry and rhyme and so on, whether in Sanskrit or anything else.
Yes.
So if you want to make a good point, you should hire somebody to rewrite your 9 volumes in verse.
Good. So you come and help me do that. See, the interesting thing is, I go to 10 Indians, and they give me 20 lifetimes worth of work to do. Not one of them is going to come in and do one little thing on his own. If I say you don't give me ideas, give me plans where you can help, then they're all gone, run away. I have on my website how to help, because I keep getting ideas of helping, and I've given 5 ways of helping, with knowledge, with resources, with time, with this, with that, whatever. And each one of them says, give me a proposal with this written down and what you can do. Otherwise, if I were to make a list, I could give you a 3-day seminar on all the things I would love to do and I would like to get help in. I would like to write the 50-page monographs that are easy to read. I would like to translate into 20 languages. I would like to make DVDs. I would like to make motion pictures. I would like to own I would like you to buy out CNN and give it to me so I can run it. I would like you to put me in the White House so that I can appoint a cabinet and allocate resources. I would like to run the United Nations and change it. I would love to rewrite all the school textbooks. I could go on telling you all the things I would love to do. And it is not like I don't have ideas and I'm not imaginative, but the point is that I am able to do so much. And I welcome people to come and help me do whatever those things are. I mean, I would love to have more people help me.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you, Rajiv, that you had given some examples of individuals who took some Indian concepts or knowledge and then kind of appropriated it, and without quoting the source, and then later the source was obliterated. Now, how does this relate to the mass digestion of a civilization? Like individuals doing that? And
very good. Now this is a very astute question, because Bhavna has been involved in a lot of these things and discussions for a very long time. Digestion is at 3 levels, and I'm writing a whole series of books on that. One is individual journey. So some guy goes and he digests things for himself, creates a patent, and he comes up with makes a lot of money, becomes famous. That's an individual digestion. Second level of digestion is a whole discipline or a school of thought transforming with digested knowledge. So like modern linguistics in the West. Modern linguistics in the West is born out of in the 1800s, the study of Panini in Germany, England and France for 75 years. And you look at the history of linguistics, there was linguistics, but very radically upgraded and enhanced through the study of Sanskrit. So that's an example of a whole discipline being transformed, and now we are seeing that in neuroscience and cognitive science and things of that sort, where a whole discipline is being transformed. That is not individual journey, but a whole collection of people, their cumulative effect has a certain transfer of knowledge going on. That's the second level. And the third level is at the level of the whole civilization, where the entire civilization repositions itself by assimilating and adopting and borrowing and whatever, digesting things from a whole lot of others. Like the pagans are gone and the Native American civilization is gone. And I feel that in another generation the Tibetan civilization will be gone. So those are not individual digestions by one guy here, one guy there. It's a kind of the ultimate effect on the whole civilizational level is the digestion of something by something else. So there are these different levels, and my book is organized in fact into individual journeys, collective journeys of a school of thought, and the whole civilization's journey.
So actually, let me use the prerogative of asking you the last question and then hand it off to Sant. So, as a last question, what makes America great is that this is a melting pot, and I think what I have observed in India is that India has never really been a melting pot. So when you travel from Kashmir to Kerala, you see significant differences between people. So if you look around this room, most of us are first generation Americans, if you will, or immigrants. And there are a few people here who might be our children. What is your message to the next generation of Indians living in this country? Do you cling on to your old Indian heritage, or do you assimilate, and how do you do that?
Well, they are not mutually exclusive. You have a very proud, if you live in New York, you'll see Irish Day Parade, you'll see, Italian Day Parade, and you'll see, there's Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jewish Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Day Parade. So there's a misnomer that to be fully American you have to stop being who you are, and because as long as you are identifying with a certain civilization and a certain land of origin, then you are somehow you have to have an inferiority complex, and you have to give that up in order to be fully American. I don't think that is the case at all. In fact, I find that Americans respect you more if you have a clear sense of identity and are able to articulate it with mutual respect. Not with chauvinism and not knocking down someone else, but with mutual respect. If you can say, this is my background, this is my civilization. Americans are so proud. You meet Americans, they'll say, you know, I'm Episcopalian, my parents came from England, or we came from Germany. I mean, they're so proud of that. So America, because it's a melting, I think more than a melting pot, it's a salad bowl where the different identities have preserved themselves in large measure. I mean, you see in Pennsylvania, it's Dutch country. It's a Dutch country. I mean, you go to Louisiana, it's French country. So hundreds of years later, they've still preserved a certain character, and they're very proud of it. So far, the predominant cultures that represented the tapestry of America were from different parts of Europe. The non-European, Hispanic, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, sort of more recent phenomenon. But if you look at the history of immigration in America, it's all about new groups coming, negotiating who they are, their sense of identity with the American mainstream, and defining that we are American, we want all the rights, we are absolutely equal, we are patriotic as can be, but there is this distinctiveness about us. And this is what makes you an American, a complete American, is when you can be different and be American at the same time, and not have any complex or any tension between the two.
Very well. Thank you very much.
I'm here to convey our vote of thanks. I'm a proud IITian. Rajiv is my guest. And what I feel Rajiv has done, which is very remarkable and rather unique, is given us a lot of things to think about. You may disagree, you may agree, but he has come up with a line of thinking and a thought process. It forces you to examine some of the questions, some of the issues that were confusing to us. So the purpose is not here to say he's right or wrong. He absolutely invites criticism and debate. And if you look at his book, please, I invite you to get his book. He has a blog. There are many ways you can help. He has a blog that you can subscribe to. You can help. Of course, as he mentioned earlier, if there are things that you want to contribute towards this topic, think about it and be on his blog and contribute. So, and he is writing a series of books, and he's always looking for help, people who can do some serious work. Thank you very much. This is Friday evening, and there was rain outside, but you're all here. Greatly appreciate it. And finally, I would like to, Rajiv, I would like to offer you a small token of gift from IIT Alumni Association, Capital IIT. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure for inviting me.
This is a necktie designed for IITians for the 50th anniversary.
Fantastic. Then I will wear one next time.
Please do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, not at all. I wasn't trying to. Right.